We're falling from the sky. I hope the parachutes deploy. Hello, Internet, and welcome back to another Space Engineers modding tutorial. So, today we're going to be covering the idea of making a dropship mod, and if I'm right, in covering this mod, watching this should give you enough of a basis to create any sort of simple, basic level mod you can think of. It'll at least give you the right tools, hopefully. So, let's hop on in. And the first thing I'll kind of show is what exactly I mean by a drop pod. So, this is the sort of start screen when you start a new survival world. And if I hover over, you can see all these different drop pods. Well, two different drop pods that go different places. This is a drop pod. It's the sort of vanilla starting survival little thing. It's got all your bits in it that you need. And from this screen, you can choose one and you appear floating over a planet or in space or a moon, and you just kind of go. So my drop pod for today's exercise is this. The Combi Kit Outfitted Mobile Base 1. Definitely had to work for that acronym. But this is, the discerning among you may see, a van. That's kind of the idea. I wanted something, a sort of deployable drop pod that is a mobile sort of survival start base. So, we have this thing. I don't believe it's airtight. If I hop in, it has 2 seats, a lovely little dashboard companion. It's got a survival kit. It's got an O2H2 tank. Back in here, there's a battery up there. Oh no, it's leaving. There we go. Yeah, it's got an antenna, ore detector, gyroscope. Kind of everything you would need. And speaking of everything you need, I guess I should go over what I would say are the general what you need for one of these, and then just kind of things that are good ideas. So, this is the default vanilla drop pod. You can see it has a chair. Inside this chair, there is a gun, some ammo, and this gets spawned in by the economy stuff, so you can ignore that. But it's got some stuff for you, the engineer. It has a large grid battery. It has an O2H2 generator with tanks and ice in store. And it's got a survival kit that is accessible and accessible to build stuff in. These are kind of the basics things that you'd need, and you could theoretically even skip the O2H2 generator if you wanted. You also, and this is the other kind of big important thing, is a parachute with a parachute canvas inside it already. The basics, if you wanted to make a completely minimalist drop pod, you would need survival kit, battery, parachute, seat. And that's it. Everything else is just kind of detailing and adding some benefits. It's a good idea to have an ore detector and antenna just to help players find ores starting out. Some form of mobility, I'd say, is a good idea. The default pod has these 4 downward facing thrusters that you can grind off and reorient or turn into wheels or do whatever you need to with them. It's also got this little thing down here. The default one does not have a gyroscope or any sort of control mechanism, but it's got enough parts in here that you can build one. So, yeah, it's sort of a pile of equipment and some useful utility stuff to get you started. And that's the idea of a drop pod, is it's where you start in a survival world. So with the drop pod mod, you want to make it for some gameplay function. Your goal is to give the player a start condition. So with the Combi, the idea is that you start with the ability to drive on land. No flying available, but you can drive around, scout a little bit, find a convenient spot or some resources. It's set up in a way that this vehicle's not really useful long term because of the orientation of the survival kit and O2H2 generator. They aren't super convenient. You can access everything, so you can access the survival kit. A little just general game tip. If you look at a survival kit's this thingy and press I, you can access the inventory. And if you have 2 large grid ports, so survival kit has a large grid port here. The O2H2 generator, you can just see the backing of the port back here. You can actually get a little highlight for the survival kit. Looking at this, pressing I for the inventory, show connected. Even though I'm not directly accessing the O2H2 generator, I can actually drag the stuff out of it into my body. So, just a little tip, you can access and use the large grid ports to pass bottles and stuff through the survival kit screen, because they both have large grid ports. So, just a way to make extra compact things with survival kit and O2H2 gen. So anyway, the basic setup for a drop pod, and I guess I should specify, I understand the basics of what I'm doing. I've never actually done this before. I've not made this type of mod. So I don't know if there's anything you have to do to specify what seat you start in or tell the game how to do that. I do know you want parachutes in your parachute hatches ready to go. You want all the inventory preloaded, including inventory in your seat and all that stuff. And you want to have your parachutes set up so that they auto-deploy at... I put in at 200 meters. You can do however you want. Higher is obviously safer. It gives more time to deploy. But in general, you want everything set up so that you could copy and paste this into the sky above a planet and it would just work from there, because that's essentially what the in-game system does, is it just spawns this blueprint in the sky with you in it and lets gravity take over. So yeah, if you're building one of those, keep that stuff in mind, have everything kind of ready in your blueprint to go beforehand, and then you should be ready to rock. The next step is I'm going to hit Control Copy, looking at my thingy. That's Control C. I have it here. Now I'm going to hit F11, hit this button here that says Export Clipboard to File. So that is now in a file ready for us to use, and we'll get to that later. But that's how we get this blueprint out of the game and ready to put into a mod. So next step is we're going to come back out to Steam, and we're going to be opening some folders. So first, we want to get to the game folder. We'll go to Steam up here in the left corner, Steam up here in the left corner, Settings. I'm going to go down to Downloads, Steam Library Folders right there at the top. This will bring up where you can set up where your Steam download library goes. Click to where your actual games are downloaded. If you have multiple, you'll probably only have one thing up here. So, click to where the games are downloaded, hit this little 3-dot fella, Browse Folder. That pulls up our Steam Apps folder. From in here, we're going to want to go to Common, and then scroll down. This will be a list of all your games with all their individual folders. You want to find Space Engineers. Double click that to get in, go into Content, and then go into Data. So, this here, and if we go up one, this is basically all the game files for Space Engineers, all the default stuff. So, if we go in, like Textures has a bunch of texture files for all the different things in the game. Particles for particles. Models will be all the different block models. So this is all the game stuff. Data specifically holds all the SBC files that kind of control how the game works. So these are XML file types that you can just click on, open, and edit. So you can just change stuff in here, and depending on what you change, well, you could break stuff, but if you change specific things, you can set up stuff so that it kind of does what you want. So, for example, this is the cargo ships pad that kind of dictates the default spawning of cargo ships in game. This is also the basic SBC file that the modular encounter system is based on. You may notice this is the spawn group folder if you watched that previous tutorial. The stuff in here, if you just dig around and find stuff, everything's pretty reasonably named. Conveniently, it's in English. So you can just kind of go through here, find random stuff, and this lets you make pretty much any mod change you could want in the game. So there's a very powerful set of stuff to find. Basically, all you need to do is copy one of these files into a mod and make the changes you want and go, and you now have a mod. So, speaking of that, let's go into another folder. We're going to want to go to our search bar and type %appdata%. This takes us to our local app data folder. This is sort of the counterpoint to the Steam games folders. This is where all the information pertaining to your specific version of the game lives. So your Space Engineers data lives somewhere in here. You'll just want to scroll down until you find the Space Engineers folder, go into it. This is where your world saves live, all your blueprints and all that. There's also this handy folder called mods, which is where all locally installed mods live. You can see my previous tutorial if you're curious about where mods downloaded from Steam live. I won't be covering that today because we don't need them today, but they're in a separate place that's fairly easy to find. So, in here, this is the mods folder. This is where I'm going to create my mod. You could do the actual mod stuff. You could store the files wherever. You have to put them in this folder to run them in the game. But if you don't want to store them there, you don't have to. It's just a convenient spot. So I'm going to create a new folder. And I'm going to call it Combi Drop Pod for the Combi Drop Pod mod. So what we're going to want to do, and this is a point where it's actually probably a good idea. I always say I'm not going to cover something and then immediately realize I need to cover it. So to kind of get this set up as a mod, the easiest way I know to do it is to go into a different mod and copy the stuff from it. If we want to kind of start our mod, you can think of it a bit like seeding a sourdough bread. I'm going to go back over here. So where workshop mods are stored, they are in the Steam Apps folder. Actually, the base Steam Apps folder. They're in this folder called Workshop. And then through Content, you kind of have to poke around. I know this is the Space Engineers because I've done this before. I assume that number's the same for everyone, but I don't know. Basically, these represent, at this level, these are the different games that have workshop mods that you have installed. So I'm going to go in here. I know this is Space Engineers. The easiest way to tell is to click into one of these actual mod folders and find a thumbnail. Yes, this is Space Engineers. So, from here, we want to take the metadata.mod folder. And actually this isn't a great one because that's a script. Let's find, are you a real mod? Yes, you're a real mod. So, to start your own mod, the way to sort of start it, you go in, you find this metadata.mod folder, and you take the data folder, Control C to copy, Control V in your folder. You now have the basis of a mod. I'm still not 100% sure what the metadata.mod folder is or does. You can, if you right click, tell it to open with, and this functionality, depending on your OS, may be different, but you can open it in Notepad and look, and it basically just says, here's XML file stuff. So I assume all it does is point to, that's what these are, this is a mod, Space Engineers look at this as a mod. And Space Engineers won't recognize it as a mod without this in it. So the easiest way I've found is to just steal it from somewhere. But you do that, you want a data folder, which you don't strictly need, but it's nice to keep things organized. This stuff we can get rid of because that's not our mod. So in here, in the data folder, we want to replace it with a file from the Space Engineers game files, one of the SBC files. So we navigate back to that, and for any mod you want to make, this is how you do it. You would just copy the SBC from here into the file of your mod and make your changes in the mod. I would not recommend making changes in the game files because it could break things. In theory, I guess if you change it and then don't update the game, it would stick. So if you don't really care about modding versus just changing, you can do that, but anytime the game updates or if you refresh the files, it would get deleted from here and fixed to the standard. So, I'm going to scroll down. For the drop pod mod specifically, there is a folder down here. Actually, I think I've missed it. Yes, called respawnships.sbc. So if we open this up, this is the folder that kind of controls all of the provides the respawn pods. It's not super easy to read, but if you look at it, it's very similar to the spawn groups for an MES mod, because it's functionally about the same thing. So, we go down, it has an icon to use for the respawn pod. Cooldown, I don't know what that does. It's got a section for the prefab, so that's where we're going to actually link the thing we want to spawn. Then some other various settings. A lot of this you can probably leave the same as vanilla and basically just change your prefab, but if you want to make changes, get creative, you can do that here too. So, we want to Control-C copy, Control-V paste into our data folder. And then the next thing, just to get everything in position, we want to find the file we exported of the combi or whatever grid you're using and put that in the folder as well. So conveniently, those also live in the app data folder under export. So we can see that I actually have one that I did before because this isn't the first take of this tutorial. But this one sub 1 is the one we exported for this. Do some file cleaning. This one we can just Control X because we don't need it in here. Back into our mods, back into our specific folder, into data, and paste it in. The next step to do is to link the respawn thing. What I'm actually going to do for this mod, because I don't necessarily want to get rid of the other respawn pods, and I say this, I've not tried this before. This may not actually work, but what I'm going to attempt to do is just copy one of these and paste it right under the previous one. So I'm keeping the list intact. I'm just adding my thing to it. Yeah, let's go back and kind of look through this. So this first chunk, starting with ship and ending with, this is how you end in XML, so end ship. This first chunk is for planetary landers, and the main difference, there's this used for planets with atmosphere, true. So if this were set to false, it would not spawn on planets with atmosphere, it would spawn on moons. So this is sort of the tell difference between spawning something on a planet or a moon. This one below it is the moon pod, as you can see here, and used for planets without atmosphere, or without atmosphere is true. So I guess you could set it to with atmosphere false or without. In theory, you don't need to write these from scratch. You can just copy whichever one you want for your specific pod and change it to be your pod. But that's kind of the difference. And then this last one is the spaceship pod, which just spawns it in space. So use for space is true. So what we're going to do, because we want this to be a planetary spawn, we'll copy the first one. I'm just going to tab, maybe a little bit so there's some gap in between, and paste my part into it. So this will be, we'll just call it respawn combi as the subtype ID. That, I believe, has to be something unique. That's how it is generally. Now, display name, I don't fully know what this means, so let's try and change it. We're getting into the I've not actually created this mod part before. I'm just going to make tweaks and see what happens. So I don't actually know quite what I'm doing or how it'll work. We're just going to tweak things and figure it out on the fly. Respawn planetpod.png. That's probably the icon that it uses. I don't want to have to create an icon. May do that later. In theory, you can change this file path to be probably just linking to a file in the root folder, so it would just be respawnplanetpod.png. You wouldn't have all these other slashes. I don't know if that's the case, but that would be my guess, and you can change the icon. I'm just going to leave it as is because it doesn't really matter, I don't think. Cooldown's fine. So for prefab, so this is something where we're going to want to open our blueprint. And this prefab, it is the subtype something. Yeah, I believe it is this where it says subtype. And you'll notice this subtype name is the same name as the file minus the .sbc. I believe subtype is the sort of string it looks for when linking stuff, but it usually matches the name of the file. But if I change the name of the file, or like you saw before, this file originally had a sort of sub1 because there were two of them, it can mess things up. So this is the string you need, I believe, and we're going to stick it here where it says prefab. Like so. Now, the rest of this stuff is probably good. We want it to have use for planets with atmosphere. And this stuff about linear and angular velocity. Oh, so what that would control, linear velocity will be how fast it's moving downwards. So this will spawn at, I guess, 2 kilometers up. moving down at 95 meters a second. Then this angular velocity, I believe, would control spin. So it will be spinning around its y-axis, which is up and down, I believe. If we're to assume this is what I said it is. So it'll be spinning slightly. So if you're familiar with the spawn pod in game, it does start coming down, it's moving at a decent speed when you start, and you are rotating slightly. So I'm actually going to change that to 0 just because our grid has a gyroscope, so that won't work. Everything else should probably be good. We'll hit Control S to save that file. Close down both. And I believe that's everything we need to do, so now we can go in and test. So for testing this sort of mod, for a drop pod mod specifically, you're going to want to go to a new game, custom game, and then scroll all the way down to Star System, because that's the map that has a custom spawn, or that spawns you with a spawn pod. Yeah, you're going to want it to be in survival, because if you do creative, it'll just spawn you in your suit on the planet. Then you're going to want to go into mods, and you should see, if you've set everything up correctly with the .mod folder, you should see your mod in this list right at the top with a little house for local. So, we'll pop that in. That's the only mod we need for this, so okay. We'll name the world just so we know what it is. We don't need to change anything else. So let's start. Now the thing we'll be looking for once it loads in is that list that I showed at the beginning of the video. If in that list we can find our drop pod, we know it's worked. And we don't... Okay. So it may not work quite like I thought. So we still get a sort of info thing from the moon and the space pod, but we don't get anything for the planets. So let's just try an Earth-like drop. It may be that we can't have duplicates. Oh! Okay. So you just saw we spawned in the combi. We're falling from the sky. I hope the parachutes deploy. There they go. Ah, I really put that on tight, huh? Okay. So, the mod has worked. And we found silver. That's convenient. I can now, if I turn off my handbrake, I think that's just the lights. Yeah. I can now drive around in my respawn pod. That has a little respawn marker that's in the ground. Not quite sure why that's the case. It's not horribly important. Now, I'm gonna go back, specifically make a quick change. So, this was asked in a comment on the last video. Now that this has been spawned in, this .sbc file, you can see this .sbc b5. That's just basically, to my understanding, and if we open it up here, it looks similar to this, but obviously not in human readable. I believe this is the game essentially creating a game readable or software readable version of that file, and it just sticks it in here right next to it for easy access. This is probably compressed more easily for the game to be able to quickly read stuff. I don't know, computer lingo. But that's what this is. It'll just kind of be automatically created when your thing spawns in, so if you see this in a mod, you don't have to worry about it. Okay. So we're going to go in and make some changes here. Because we can't have our spawn ship and the default one, I am just going to get rid of the default spawn ship. Now, interestingly, it didn't seem to call an icon, and this respawn screen help text spawner, help text spawn also didn't work. I assume this is the thing that tells you this is where the planet, like, this is the difficulty for this spawn on this planet. Now, I don't know if that was an issue with the pod itself, like if it's an issue with this file not being available for this pod, or if it's an issue of this file being confused because there were two things trying to call it. So, yeah, I'm not sure on that. But we've made our change, control save. Now, and I would recommend for testing a drop pod mod specifically, try not to let the world save, which I may be too late and the world may have saved. Let's see here. Maybe not because the screen's black. Essentially, you want to keep it in a state where it'll save when you sort of initiate the world, and then anytime you load in, it'll ask you to spawn. And for this type of stuff, if you want to iteratively test your mod and changes, you have to save it and then exit out of the world, load back in. Okay, so that's worked here. Yeah, so it doesn't seem to like the text. And that could be because, this is just spitballing in the dark, because this stuff, so the help text spawn and, where is it, the icon respawn ship, respawn planet pod, because those aren't in the same folder as the mod, they're in a default game folder, technically this path, this file path is wrong. So that might be why the stuff's not showing up. But, here, let's spawn in and enjoy the go. Yeah. Clearly it's working to a degree. There's some glitchiness, but the gist of it, that's how you would make a drop pod mod, and kind of how you would make any mod you wish to make. I hope the parachutes go. There they go. I love that I made it just close enough that you're like, am I gonna crash to death? That's a sign of a good mod. So, that's how you do that. Kind of how you do anything. The easiest way to do it is just dig around in the files and see what you can create. Worst comes to worst, you can always uninstall and reinstall the game, and the files you accidentally deleted will come home. So yeah. Thank you everybody so much for watching. Hopefully this is helpful to some of you who may be interested in learning to mod and don't know how to mod already. Feel free to check out the other stuff I've done. Until next time, bye bye.